So, welcome everybody to another Thought Sparks podcast. And I am absolutely thrilled to be here with Robert Pasin, the CEO, or Chief Wagon Officer, rather, of Radio Flyer, the beloved, iconic, fun company. And he sent me some homework before this, how to be a phenomenal flyer. So, this is, I guess it's a guide for your people, right? For your employees. So,
yes.
As an answer to the question, how do I be successful at this company? And the company itself is over 100 years old, which they commemorated with it's a beautiful book full of incredible pictures of like giant flyers and small flyers and the evolution of the game. And I thought to start off, I'll just make the observation, and you've said this yourself, that your typical large corporate organization tops out at about 40 to 50 years, and then it gets broken up, acquired, or goes out of business. And Radio Flyer has been the real exception to this rule. It's B Corp, so here to do good. And I thought maybe just start us off with the story, your grandfather and how that all evolved.
Yeah, I'd love to, Rita. Thank you for having me on your show. The first time I came to Radio Flyer, I was 5 years old, and my dad brought me to work with him. And I remember that day like it was yesterday because it had such an impression on me. I remember walking around the factory with my dad, holding his big hand, and hearing the sounds of the factory, the punch presses, smelling the paint, and seeing all these shiny red wagons on this conveyor line. And as a kid, it seemed like some sort of magical Rube Goldberg machine that was pumping out these little red wagons and sending them out into the world. And I remember asking my dad, where do these all go? And he said, well, they go to stores around the country so people can buy them and bring them home and play with them and have fun. And I just thought it was so cool. And I felt so proud, being with my dad. And as I grew up, I learned that not only were part of this amazing product that brought joy to families, but that my grandpa had this amazing immigrant story where he came from this small town in Italy. His dad and grandpa were carpenters. So as a small boy, my grandpa, his name was Antonio, learned all these carpentry skills, but they were a very poor family. So when Antonio was 16 years old, he decided to come to America to find a better life. He ended up in Chicago, and he worked in any job he could find. And eventually he saved up enough money to rent a small garage on the west side of Chicago, where he started to put those carpentry skills to work. And he made furniture and phonograph cabinets and anything that he could sell. And eventually he made a wooden wagon to haul tools around.
And that was the start? That was the start?
Yeah, that was the start. It was a very pragmatic innovation. And pretty soon people who were coming to buy furniture from him were saying, hey, can I buy one of those wagons? And in those days, it was both tool and toy. So people would use them for carting things around, but they'd also use them to haul kids around. And that was really where he found his success. So pretty soon he was selling more wagons than anything else. Then he transitioned in the 20s from wood to steel manufacturing, which enabled him to mass produce the product. And that was the result of this. And that resulted in the creation of this iconic little red wagon that everybody knows and loves.
And I was fascinated in looking at the history book that the reason he named it Radio Flyer was that he was so intrigued at the brand new technologies that were coming out. And one of them was radio and the other was air flying.
Yeah,
so decided to name it Radio Flyer. That has been a mystery to me for my entire life. I've always looked at these little things and going, why is it named that? That was the first time I understood it.
I know. I think that's part of the magic of the name. It's kind of this incongruous name that doesn't make sense with the product, but it was just because they, like you said, they were two cool high-tech inventions. They were buzzwords at the time. So I like to say that if you were naming it today, maybe he would call it the quantum AI dronester, or something like that. That would be the equivalent today.
I love that. Oh, that's so fun. So he started to find some success. Kind of what happens next?
Yeah, well, so in 1933, the World's Fair came to Chicago, and my grandpa had the business established at that point. He had this little red wagon. He had named it Radio Flyer, and he decided this was his chance on the world stage to introduce his product and his brand. And so he built this gigantic 45-foot tall boy riding a radio flyer wagon. And it was a very Art Deco stylized, designed exhibit, because that was what the fair was all about, was the latest and greatest things. And underneath this gigantic boy on a wagon, my grandpa built this little workshop where they demonstrated how they made the wagons. And they made these little miniature wagons that they sold for 25 cents. And that was really the birth of the brand. And it was a watershed moment in the company's history.
Wow. And then the company made it through the Great Depression.
The company made it through the Great Depression. During World War II, we made what were called Blitz cans, which were these metal cans used to help fuel mobile units in the U.S. Army. And then the company thrived, through the 50s and into the 60s. And then my dad took over the company after my grandpa. But by the time I came into the company in the early 90s, we were really at a crossroads. The company was declining. We were not profitable. We had accumulated quite a bit of debt, and we were really under threat of going out of business.
Wow. So that was roughly when?
In the early 90s.
Early 90s. Well, there were so many things that were coming together at that point in history, right? So we had the very earliest kind of real digital. Kids were not playing the way that they used to. Kids were growing up faster than they used to, seemingly. All this kind of very supervised play. Kids weren't allowed to be free range anymore. All those things I could imagine would have a big impact on the business.
That of course did have an impact, but really it was more of a self-inflicted wounds that we were suffering from, because what had happened, and we had become, I think, a little bit of a victim of our own success. We had had so much success for so long. We had become the very inwardly focused manufacturer. We weren't really in touch with the external environment. We weren't doing market research. We viewed ourselves as steel stamper. So if you walked into the building 35 years ago and just grabbed anybody and said, "What do you do here?" They said, "Well, we make wagons. That's what we do here." And what also happened was that when I first started the company, so I joined the company in 1992, a few months after I started, competitors came out with plastic wagons. And these plastic wagons were not cheaper than our wagons, but they had a lot more features, like molded in seats and a door where a kid could get into the wagon and things like that consumers preferred. And we didn't see it coming at all, because we weren't in touch with our customers. And so those plastic wagons started taking significant sales away from what had been our best seller for 30 years, the Town and Country wagon, which was a wood-sided wagon that many people grew up with. And we were in a total crisis. So sales were declining. We weren't profitable. We had an entrenched culture that had kind of declined significantly. And I was new on the job, and I didn't know anything. I was green and clueless, but I was so passionate about the business, and I loved the brand so much and what it meant to people. I felt like, we have something really, really special here. We just need to figure out how to really revive it and reinvent it to go forward.
It was super interesting. I was having a conversation the other day with Sharon Price John, who is
Build-A-Bear.
Build-A-Bear, absolutely.
Yeah, I know her. She's great.
Great. She's terrific. But similar situation, right? Fabulous brand, just kind of in over its head in terms of needing to scale and grow. And I think she took a similar perspective. She said when she first started at the company, she said she had to ask people, okay, is the world better with Build-A-Bear in it or not? And the answer was, well, of course it's better with Build-A-Bear in it. And she said, well, then we're going to have to figure out how to save it. And it strikes me that you came into this with a similar perspective.
Yeah, I love that. Yes. One of the things that I started to do was just ask people, and our customers, but just even I'd be sitting next to somebody on the plane, and I'd say, what does radio flyer mean to you? Or did you have a radio flyer as a kid? And people would say, oh yeah, I used to imagine it was a race car or a rocket, and I was playing outside and the wind was in my hair and the sun was in my face, and I was with people I love, like my brother or my grandma. And it's all these amazing warm memories that people were recounting from their childhood, these best times of their childhood. And so it became really clear, like, we don't just make wagons, we bring smiles and create warm memories. That's really our mission. And the wagon is a vehicle for that. And it's a cherished vehicle. It's a portal. It's a magic carpet. It's all these really cool, powerful, emotional things. And if we can really key into that, maybe we can do a lot more than just wagons. And by changing the mindset we had of ourselves, it really unlocked the full potential of what our brand means to people. And it was really exciting and invigorating during this time of crisis.
So you came into the role. Now, did you come in as the sort of leader, heir apparent? Was that your role?
No. I mean, first of all, we were really, it was a very small team of people. But I came in sales. So there was a VP of sales who everybody had been working here forever. It was kind of my dad's generation. My dad was in his late 60s at the time. So everyone had been here for a really long time. So I came in working for the VP of sales, which was an amazing job to have right out of the gates, because I was meeting with our customers and our buyers who were not mincing words about, you guys need to come up with some new products. You've been kind of coasting here for a while. So that's where I started. But because we were so small and because it was our family business, I got included in all kinds of meetings and things I never would have been anywhere else at the age of 24, 25, 26, which was just an incredible education that I'm so grateful for. I mean, it was like an MBA on steroids. I remember one time early in my job, my dad said, "Hey, Robert, come here. Jerry's here from the bank. He's here to talk to us." And what I found out later was that Jerry was a workout guy from the bank. And he sat my dad and me down and just started yelling at us, saying, "You have no cash. Do you get it? You have no cash." And I was like, how much cash are we supposed to have? I mean, I didn't know anything about a business, but I quickly learned it's good to have cash.
Cash is good. So how did you guys think about turning things around?
Well, I mean, first of all, we were under threat from these plastic wagons, so we had to figure that out first. That was really job number one. But we didn't have anybody in the company who knew anything about that manufacturing process. We didn't have the equipment. We didn't have the money to invest and retool to start making plastic wagons in our factory in Chicago. But we were able to find a manufacturer in Wisconsin to help us do it. And they made the plastic wagons, and we designed several that were losers, that didn't work until we got it right. We just kept at it. And it was really slow going. But eventually we did figure that out. We started to gain traction on the plastic wagons. But one of the biggest moments for me when I really felt like, okay, I think I can do this, I think I can figure this out, was when I would have these conversations with people and asking them about their radio flyer experience, like I was describing, and they would talk about their little red wagon. A lot of times people would say, "Oh yeah, I had a radio flyer tricycle." And I'd say, "Oh really? Tell me about your tricycle." And they would describe it in a lot of detail. They would say it was red and shiny. It had a chrome handlebars. It had a big bell. It had 2 steps on the rear deck, and it was a radio flyer tricycle. And the thing was, we had never made that tricycle. It wasn't our brand. We had not made tricycles, but people remembered having this classic red tricycle from their childhood, but the brand had either gone away or they didn't remember the brand, and they were assigning our brand to that product. And I was like, wow, that is incredible. Maybe we should make a tricycle. And so we did. And we created this tricycle and gave people those design cues. That was in 1999. We launched that tricycle, and people would point to it and say, "That's the tricycle I had as a kid." And they're sort of right. They had a tricycle that looked like that, but it wasn't ours. And it quickly became a great seller. And I realized, our brand can extend into all these products, anything around outdoor active play, anything with wheels for kids. If we get the design right and the branding right, we could really start to grow.
Now, when did you become the chief wagon officer?
I in 1997. So I was 28 years old. I was really young, but it was because nobody else wanted the job.
So your dad was ready to be done, and
Dad was ready to be done. My dad is still alive. He's 95 years old, but my dad and I have always had a really good relationship built on a lot of mutual respect and trust. And so early on, I would just say to my dad, like, I'll solve this problem. And I'd come back and solve whatever problem, small or large. And after a while, he'd be like, okay, all right, you just, you can solve them all. Like, I'm going to take a break. So fortunately, I wasn't in one of these situations where the old guy's hanging on forever. And that was a true gift. My dad really allowed me to run with it and make mistakes and goof up. And so that was a true gift.
That's amazing. And it's wonderful that he's still around to see this, what's happened with this environment. I think that's great. So you talked about being willing to make mistakes and get through it and learn, and that's something just across the range of companies I talk to, that seems to be like one of the things that people just can't figure out. How do I get rid of the fear of failure? How do I make it okay to try things? And I keep saying, my philosophy, which is if it's genuinely uncertain, you're not going to know what the outcome is. And I think you said in one of your books that it's until it's in a package, in a box, on a shelf, and a consumer picks it up and buys it, you don't know if it's going to work or not.
Absolutely. Yes.
So how do you create that tolerance? I mean, how do you get people unafraid to be wrong or to fail?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways. A few key ways that I try to do it is, first, I talk about my own product failures. So especially in those early years, I was experimenting a ton, and these were really like my babies. Like these were my product ideas, and I was coming out with them, and I had a lot of failures, and I talk about those. We have a learning and development program here that we call Wagon U, of course. And the first class people have is with me. And that's one of the things I talk about are those failures. So
the early plastic ones?
Pardon me?
The early plastic ones that didn't work out? The
early plastic wagons. I did a doll in a wagon that was a spectacular failure. We did a TV commercial for it for the first time. It was a disaster. One of the fun things that's fun about our business is that the product failures tend to be pretty funny because they're toys and it always seems so obvious in hindsight when you look at these things. You're like, oh, of course that was a failure. But I always tell people some of the biggest successes, when you say them today, they may have a really wild product name, or they might be kind of this incongruous combination of things, but because it's a success, everyone says, oh, of course it's a success, but you really don't know. So be careful to judge. I
think a thing that failed at one point, maybe just too early. Like I always think of General Magic, that
yes.
These guys invented an iPhone in 1985.
Right.
We knew we wanted such a thing, but we didn't have the internet. We didn't have infrastructure. There wasn't really anything you could do with it. And even though it was brilliant technology, it just had no market.
Absolutely. I think too early, or you could be really close. Like it's not 100% failure or 100% success either. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of, if maybe the price was a little bit different, maybe if it had 3 less features, or maybe if a competitor didn't come out with something. There's so many factors that we do try to learn from the failures, but sometimes it's really hard to even know, because if you ask consumers why didn't they buy it, they'll tell you why they think they didn't buy it, but that may not be the real reason, because we're emotional creatures. So we talk about the failure a lot, but I think the most important thing is that we don't bet the farm on any one new product. I mean, new products are the main thing that we do, and it's the main ways that we fail. And so we just try to do a lot of experiments, and we call it plant a lot of seeds. And any one seed, if that seed dies and doesn't succeed, it's not going to bring down the whole thing. And so I think by having that, it's when you make the bigger the bet, the more people will tend to engage in activities that are, covering their rear ends and not fessing up when things go wrong. It's when the stakes get so high, then people get more scared. Mm-hmm. So if everybody knows, hey, this 9 out of 10 new products or some stat like that fail.
Mhm.
And so that's how we try to normalize it. So those are some of the ways.
So do you have a system for encouraging experimentation? I mean, you talk about planting a lot of
Yeah.
seeds. Do, how do
Yeah,
you
I
do?
mean, we do for new products. We have a prototype shop in the building where we can build anything. And our team of designers and engineers on our product development team, they're mechanical engineers and industrial designers. When they have ideas, the goal is to get that idea into a physical form as quickly, cheaply, and roughly as possible. So we'll literally be sawing up wood and nailing it together just to look at a form factor, or we'll make maybe a little bit more advanced prototype that a kid could actually ride. And then we bring in kids to it. We have a test track here in our building, and that's outside, and we have a play lab inside where we have a lot of kids and families come in and we ride and test things. So there's a long lead up to actually, final design and tooling up a product. And by iterating and doing that, having that kind of prototyping approach, that's what encourages a lot of experimentation, because the stakes are so low. Like, okay, if that one didn't work, fine. We spent an hour building it. Let's move on to the next idea.
And usually there's something that you've learned from the one that came before, right? That there's something that will carry on into the future. And I know this with corporate venturing. If you look at the really successful internal ventures, an awful lot of times they were built on the ashes of something that was a disaster. But something emerged out of that then became the next thing. The canonical example would be the Apple Lisa, which was a $10,000 personal computer in a time when nobody knew what to do with personal computers. But that was followed by the phenomenally successful Mac, which brought us basically, personal computing as we know it. It changed the world, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, is anybody allowed to go play in the prototype lab?
If you've had your safety training, you can't necessarily operate the saws and things like that without somebody who works in the prototype shop. But yes, but mostly it's our design team who's doing it.
Very fun. Very fun. And I really like that, because so many companies really struggle with it. So you talked a lot about I love the phrase, we think about the quarter century, not the quarter.
Yeah.
And the whole desire to become a B Corp. In a world where so many companies just seem to be run to the ground by people who are motivated primarily by finance. This is just such a breath of fresh air. And maybe talk a little bit about your philosophy around that.
Yeah, I mean, it really stems from my grandpa. My grandpa was he was a really wonderful person, and he had great values. He had a very simple approach to life. I mean, he came from very modest means, but he had a great eye for design. He knew how to make things of high quality, and he was an incredibly honest person. And I remember being at his funeral. He died in 1990, so I was 21 years old, and at his funeral, all these people were coming up to me and telling me stories about my grandpa. And these were vendors that were suppliers to him for many years, or people who he bought equipment from, or employees that worked in the factory for 40 years. And everybody said the same thing. It was your grandpa's word was his bond. He always smiled and made time to talk with me. He never rushed me. I always felt like, when he was talking to me, I was the only person in the room, and just really wonderful qualities like that. So I just feel so grateful that that's the example I had in business. And that's really how my grandpa taught my dad how to lead. And my dad was really the same way. And that's how I try to be, because I mean, I have been given so much. I mean, I feel so privileged that I lucked out to be born into the family that started Radio Flyer. So for me, what goes along with that is an obligation to try to share as many of those gifts as I possibly can. So that's one of the things why I want Radio Flyer to be the kind of place that anyone would want to work at, with people that you want by your side, a team that supports you and brings out the best in you. And so people can do their best work and have it connected to a purpose that means something, I mean, the fact is nobody needs our products. These are luxury items, they're affordable luxury items, but I feel like the world could use more joy. I feel like the world can use more time playing outside and using your imagination. And so to me, it's really meaningful. And I think that that's just my mission as a leader of this company, is to make that as healthy and strong and last as long as it possibly can.
Yeah, and when I think about how childhood has changed, right? My colleague Jonathan Haidt, who's at NYU, just wrote this book called The Anxious Generation, about how, phones and screens and all this digital stuff is just taking over so many young people's lives. And yet the antidote is often what you just talked about, being out in the sunshine, playing with a physical object, using your imagination, playing with other kids. And that's feels like a much happier way of living than staring at your screen under the covers at night, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, we really saw this too during the pandemic. I mean, it was such a dramatic manifestation of what you're talking about, because suddenly when families were forced to be at home, they all went out and bought our products because they needed ways to keep the kids entertained and engaged, and they were all playing outside. They were all riding bikes and scooters and tricycles, around the neighborhood again. And I think for everyone, that was a reminder of like, oh, this is what this is like. This is really nice. We should do this more often, So yeah,
it was good for you.
Exactly.
Wow. Huh. That's so interesting.
One of the things I say to our team here is that there are no health downsides to playing with our products. There's no warning, there's no surgeon warning on our products. It's the opposite. So you can't really overuse it. You can't overdo it. So that's a pretty cool thing to be part of.
That's really is. I love that. So I would imagine the culture when you started working at Radio Flyer was pretty different than the way it is today.
Yeah.
And you've been very explicit. I mean, I think this book is a really interesting manifestation, which I had a chance to look through. And it's really just so our viewers can sort of see what is going on. It's illustrated. It's full of the ideas. It's simple. It makes clear points. It sort of says, okay, here's the thing we want you to think about, and here's what it looks like in real life, right? So kind of like just full of these little things. But that didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, I would imagine that was a multi-year kind of thoughtful project about what kind of culture do we want to have. So let me hazard a guess. When you started, the culture would have been, I'll call it more traditional, kind of, I love working here, but I've got heads down. I do my job at it, that I don't look right. I don't look left. I kind of focus. And what you're talking about is a much more externally focused, changeable kind of environment that you want people to be paying attention to. But then inside the company, real norms about treating each other with respect, not shutting down ideas, this idea from improv of yes. And, how did you navigate that cultural journey?
Yeah, it was really challenging, and it took me a long time to learn myself and to figure it out. But the main culture here was a factory culture, and that had worked great for 70 years. That's a really long time. So I have a lot of respect for that. But a combination of factors, the plastic wagons coming out, the fact that the main thing that we made in this factory were steel wagons, and that was declining rapidly. And because the work that we were doing here had been the same for so long, the culture had become a culture of entitlement, isolation, and rigidity. And so trying to make any changes in this environment were very difficult. And so basically, after several years of me trying to kind of change the hearts and minds of people, and we were declining and could no longer operate a factory and have it be financially viable, we decided to shut down the factory because the plastic wagons were made somewhere else. As we were expanding into these other product lines like tricycles, we had never made those, so we were sourcing them elsewhere. And when we shut down the factory, it was one of the most difficult days of my life here, and it was. I remember it. I walked into the cafeteria for a company meeting. We didn't even have company meetings then, so everybody knew it was going to be bad news. But I explained to everybody, and these are people I'd known since I'd worked in the factory in high school. So these were not strangers. This was not some decision, being made on a spreadsheet. And I explained to everybody the financial situation the company was in, the fact that either we were going to shut down the factory or we were going to go out of business. It was really that clear. So while everybody was very sad about this, people understood it. They trusted what I was telling them was true. And one of the things that happened afterwards, which was really surprising, was that news crews came to get sound bites from people as they were leaving the parking lot, and nobody said anything negative about the company. And I attribute that to the fact that we, even though it was really difficult, we treated people with respect and handled it as well as we could. We were generous with severance and outplacement, and we tried to do it as well as we could. And then after that, though, for the people who remained at the company, it was kind of like a wake. I mean, it was like part of the company had died, and it was very sad because that was a huge part of our identity. But we went through a year-long process that I guided. I got some really good advice from one of my mentors, and we did this process where we would meet every month and talk about things like, well, what was the company like when you started here? You know, how did people treat each other? And all this good stuff came back out that had always been there. Like, you know, people really cared about the products. We always produce a quality product. And then we would talk about the brand and what does the brand mean to people. And that was where some of that imagery I was describing earlier about smiles and more memories was coming out. And we started to articulate for the first time our vision, mission, and values. We had never written these things down. And so with this group of people that had been here for a long time still, we started to articulate that. And then based on where we wanted the company to go, I started hiring people. And that was then when we really started to transform, because we had to hire the creative people that were going to be our product development team and our engine for growth going forward. And those new people then are really what started to change the culture and get us to you know, where we are today.
That's super. How traumatic that must have been, though.
It was, yeah. It was.
I mean, I was thinking of a gentleman at IBM forever, and he was reflecting on the sale of the Lenovo, you know, what became the ThinkPad brand to Lenovo. And he said, yeah, it was only 15% of our business, but it was 85% of our identity.
Yeah.
You know, and that must have been really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
But I think sometimes if you get through a crisis like that, it sort of is a forcing function. You know, you don't really have a choice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then at some point you must have decided you wanted to codify all this, because that must be where this book came from. So the book is called How to Be a Phenomenal Flyer.
Yes. Yeah. I always say we rebuilt the culture, you know, one person and one practice at a time. So we would get, you know, new people into the company and they would say, hey, how about if we do this? That it was all the team designing these different elements of the culture. Or we're here in Chicago, so we saw somebody saw that Second City does training for companies on their practices of listening and communication, and we're like, well, hey, why don't we have them come in? And so then we started to adopt some of their terminology, like yes and that you described. And so over time, we started to piece these practices together and continue to kind of codify them. And we found that, you know, when we would hire a new flyer, they would ask us these questions, and it was a lot to try to communicate. And so we're like, gosh, we should put all this down, but we don't want it to feel like this heavy-handed employee manual, you know, like that's not the vibe we want to create here, you know. So how can we do it in a way that's playful? So that's where we got the comic artists to do drawings, and then we wrote it together as a team, and yeah, we just finalized that last year. It was something we've been working on for years, so it's been really fun.
It just sounds it. I flagged. I flagged the plant a lot of seeds.
Yeah, there you go.
which I thought was great. So if somebody has an idea, how do you make resources available for the seed planting stuff? Because that's another place where I see a lot of big companies get stuck. You know, they'll have the same approval for funding for a $50,000 experiment that they do for a $5 million capital capital allocation. They don't have kind of resources for people to do small experiments. So do you have like a little pot of funding, or how do you make that happen?
It's not really that formalized with a pot of funding, but really ideas can come from anywhere. Like, for example, our head of finance, she has 4 kids, and she has 4 pretty young kids who are in our age demographic. And anytime we have a prototype, we send it home with her, and and she tests it out, and she comes back with feedback and says, hey, if maybe it's a new wagon that folds up, when I was folding this up, this thing was sticking, can you change this? Or I couldn't find the button for this, or whatever the feedback is. And the team takes that into account. And so there can be ideas like that. Or when we have company meetings, we have a monthly company meeting, and usually about every other month, we'll have some sort of product development update. And we'll have a little suggestion box where people can put in ideas. It can be anonymous, or so we have a lot of different ways. They can, of course, just come up and say, hey, we should do blank. So and actually, we find that there's a lot of work that we can do from sketching to prototyping that is very low cost and low time to get to an idea where we could react to it. We could even show it to one of our customers, like a buyer. We could show a rendering to a buyer like at Walmart or a Target, and they could say, hey, yeah, I'm kind of interested in that. And that's before we spend the big money of like making a really great looking prototype or actually tooling up a product and shipping it. So that's where we try to kind of take this funnel and narrow it down from a huge range of ideas to ideas that we think could actually be viable.
Very cool. So the people in that sort of design innovation group, they must have slack, right? They must have time to experiment and fool around.
Well, it depends on the day you would ask them. I think we try, but we are fairly, company wide. We've got about 130 people, so it's a small team. But we do try to have slack. They have design days. So another thing that our team has done that's a really great practice is, usually there are teams that are working on a specific project, a bike or a wagon or a tricycle. And they might be trying to develop a new mechanism, a folding mechanism, or a way that you could steer the adult can steer the tricycle. And so what they'll do is they'll take an afternoon and take all of the engineers and have them do a brainstorm session for 3 hours on that particular problem or challenge they're trying to solve. And those can be really cool because it kind of gets people thinking outside the projects they're working on. It gets all the brains looking at one thing. So there's a lot of different tools like that the team does that really leverages and gets everybody involved in the stuff we're working on.
Oh, that's really fun. I love that idea of having, kind of people from these very disparate groups kind of focus on my problem this week.
Yeah.
I think that's great. So, Radio Flyer traditionally sold in conventional retail. And, with the rise of digital, you guys must have had to do a lot of thinking about what do we do with this potential new channel, right? How did you manage to think about that?
Yeah, when I started here, our top 3 customers were Toys R Us, Kmart, and Walmart in that order.
Wow.
And so what I've always said, and before that it was Sears, and before that it was somebody else. So we've always sold the mass market with our main product line. And our approach really has been, we need to be where people are going to buy our kind of product. And whatever that retail customer is, we need to figure it out. And that's really been our approach. And every one has a unique flavor or a unique challenge in doing business with them. But like now, Amazon is one of our largest customers. And I remember the first time I went to the original Amazon building where Jeff Bezos started the company, 20 years ago when they were starting to sell toys. And I saw dogs in the office. That was the first time I'd ever seen that. and desks made out of wooden doors. And I was like, this is weird, but there's something cool going on here. I don't know. We need to be selling these guys.
One of their big core values is frugality. And he tried to reinforce that by using the door desks.
Right. Exactly.
Which from a straight cost perspective, some folks have told me doesn't actually save a lot of money. But it's symbolism, right?
I guess it depends on where you get the doors, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I think we just figure it out. I mean, we have to be where people want to buy the products, and it is challenging, but we figure it out.
So, but you started a direct-to-consumer website yourself.
Yes.
Yeah,
we did. Mm-hmm.
You must have had to bring in different talent and different skills and that kind of thing, right?
A little bit. I mean, we pretty much just learned it on our own, and then we would bring in maybe a consultant, on different things. But for the most part, when those things happen, we just try to figure it out ourselves, and we'll get advice, and we learn over time, and we listen to our customers. That's the other thing we do, is just find out, like, as much as possible, talk to them, what's going on. If somebody's on our website, understanding what their experience is, setting up situations where we can do the research. We do a lot of our own. We have our own research group that focuses on anything around consumer research. So, and we do it, we've always done it pretty scrappy, pretty low cost, using very simple tools like SurveyMonkey and those kind of things. Whenever I always say, if you talk to enough people, once you start hearing patterns, it doesn't have to be thousands of people to really understand these insights of our products, at least. You can talk to, in a lot of cases, we talk to parents, specifically moms, because they're usually making most of the purchase decisions in the household. And after you hear about 10 moms saying the same thing, you were probably onto something. I mean, it's not huge numbers. Are we really listening? The harder part is listening carefully and watching what they do.
Were there any big surprises that you experienced in some of those conversations?
Specifically with online selling?
No, just with talking to customers.
Oh.
I mean, I always hear people saying, like, one of my favorites was a colleague of mine who said, customers come into the store and they're not behaving the way they're supposed to. I've got grannies checking prices on iPads. Why is that happening?
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, the biggest learning in trying to understand consumer behavior and consumer wants and needs is I had to learn the hard way that consumers really cannot tell you what they're going to do. And it's much more effective to observe behavior as much as possible. And it seems really obvious when you say it that way, but so much market research is, from the head. It's asking people these logical questions and expecting logical answers that will predict reality. And people are just they're irrational creatures. There's so much going on with why people make the decisions they do. So we got really good at going into people's homes and, observing kids playing in the backyard, observing a mom trying to put a wagon in the back of a car, versus saying, well, how would you put this in the car? Just have them put it in the car and see what they're struggling with. And it seems real basic, I know when I say it this way, but figuring out, how do you find the families to go in their homes? How do you, there's logistics involved, but for years I would participate in that kind of research and be there, with the notepad. And even that's not perfect, because just by being there, you've changed, the natural behaviors and environment, but it's a lot better than being in a focus group room at some, office building asking people questions. And that's where we uncovered a lot of problems that we could solve. Like the example of putting a wagon in the back of the car, when it was these big plastic wagons. People loved the big plastic wagons for all the benefits, but they were impossible to put in the car. So people would say, gosh, could you make this thing fold up? Oh. And we'd think, well, how can we make a plastic wagon fold up? Pretty hard. But then we made folding wagons that were not plastic, that serve that need. And they're more like a metal frame, like a stroller with fabric, and they fold up. And now those are our best sellers. Wow. And it really came from those observations. Uh-huh.
That's so interesting. And the user context is different. The same person can behave completely differently in different contexts. So a story I used to love to tell was about Thanksgiving and my mom going shopping for the family, and this was at a stage when, my brother and I would come home and that was fine, but the grandchildren are coming home. So my mother, German background, very frugal, she'd be marching through the grocery store and she'd look at a display full of these beautiful candles, right? So, the fancy ones, right? And she'd look at $11 for a candle. They must be crazy, right? And on she'd go. But getting ready for Thanksgiving, perfect candle for the center of the Thanksgiving table. Cost no object. And she's already got her cart full of $200 worth of Go-Gurts and things she would never normally buy. It was just such a rich example of, here's the same woman, just in a different context.
I love that. I love
It's
that. It's so true. It's so true what you're saying. And just, I know speaking of grandparents though, like we love grandparents because here at Radio Flyer, because grandparents love to buy. It's very rare that you can buy a product that you had as a kid. That's the same brand that you can give to them. And you're basically, you're sharing part of your childhood with your grandkids. It's really, really beautiful.
I love that. That is so nice. So you're also really active, I notice, on at least on LinkedIn and maybe other social media platforms. When did you start doing that?
I started during the pandemic, and I'm not active on any other social media other than LinkedIn. LinkedIn's about all I can handle, and I have a lot of help with that. But we have been listed on Fortune Best Places to Work, over I think it's 12 times now. One year we were the #1 best place to work on Fortune for companies under 300 employees. So we have a really great, vibrant workspace. And when I started kind of getting more active on LinkedIn, it was really to get the word out about that, to put the word out that we're a great place to work. We're always hiring, and we're looking for great people. But then as it evolved, I felt like I could share more about how we do things at Radio Flyer and maybe share some of my learnings. And it's fun, it's fun. It's a way to connect with people, and I really like it. So that's what I'm doing on LinkedIn.
It's fun. Well, and it also is another communication channel, right? So, I mean, I know with my LinkedIn presence, sometimes people will ask me questions or say things that maybe go, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. And sometimes it's not, it's just obnoxious, but sometimes you can really learn from it. It's
yeah.
great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we've had business things happen as a result of it, like different collaborations, or people from different companies have seen a post and then said, hey, let's talk. And so it's been really good. I mean, it doesn't come naturally to me, the whole social media thing, but I have found that I think it's a vehicle of communication, and it's really effective, and it's one that I'm going to keep using and building.
That's great. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. So folks that are listening, definitely follow Robert on LinkedIn. He's got
Thank you.
You had a picture of yourself at the age of 5.
Thank you for following that, Rita. I appreciate that.
I thought that was really fun. So part of, I think, what you've also done is really made some investments in both your own growth. I know you and I both know Marshall Goldsmith,
yeah.
Who's been just a very powerful force for self-reflection and improvement, and maybe talk a little bit about what led you to do that, because I think what I would observe is a lot of our senior leaders. A couple of things are happening in the big companies, especially less training, less development. And then with the sort of flattening of hierarchies and the changing way that companies are organizing themselves, those kind of old corporate programs, GE, Crotonville, where you'd go and you'd get developed, and then there was a whole corporate process around helping you prepare for the next role. And what I'm seeing now among a lot of executives is they're getting put in these roles. First of all, they're not getting all the little trainer roles along the way. They're going like from this level to 10 levels up. They would have been in a previous sort of era. And they're scared, and they're lonely in many cases. They're afraid of appearing like they don't know what they're doing. They're really just anxious. And so I've been encouraging people to think about, get some peer coaching, get a coach, get somebody who can really give you that feedback and be a sounding board. And you're not worried about politics or looking dumb or anything like that. And I'd love to just have you reflect on what difference that kind of experience has made for you.
Yeah, it's been huge for me. I mean, I early on, I got very lucky and ran into a mentor that helped me and gave me my first 360 feedback. And this was when I was, 33 years old and just starting out, and the company was still in crisis, and I was figuring out how to be a leader. And the reason I did it was because I felt like the stuff that I don't know is usually the stuff that gets me. My assumptions, or So how can I become more self-aware? How can I understand how people view me? And this 360 was a wake-up call. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that was going okay, but there's a lot of stuff I was doing that I didn't realize. Like, I got feedback that humor has always been a huge part of my life. I love to laugh. I love to joke around. But I could sometimes I could use humor to dismiss people or to shut down a conversation. I got feedback that I was, being like overly commanding in the way I was leading some of my team, and a lot of blind spots that I was not aware of. And it was such a gift because I'm 33 years old. I'd been married for several years. My wife and I had a few kids at that point. And I'm thinking, I need to do this for me as a husband, as a father. Like, I want to know how other people view me so that I can, do a better job. And so for me, it was a very personal thing in addition to being a leader in the company. And I just felt like I want to learn as much as I possibly can. And what's the downside? I mean, the downside of not knowing these things and not being self-aware is so much greater than knowing it, because everybody else knows it. It's like everybody else knows all this stuff about you and you don't know it. So for me, it's been huge. And then, as you mentioned, I later met Marshall, and he worked with me as a coach, and we did the 360 again. And I learned more things. And yeah, for me, it's just been a continual journey. I'm always asking myself, what are my assumptions? What are the things that I don't know that I need to know to do a better job?
Absolutely. And for those that are not familiar with Marshall's process, what he'll do when he engages with the company, and he doesn't do this anymore, he's retired from this actively, but it's a useful practice that you don't need to be, a super, super special trained person to do. You say, well, who are the key stakeholders for this person? And then goes and sort of says, tell us their strengths, tell us where they have, blind spots or have problems. And what would success look like if they successfully addressed those? And that's the part that I think is unusual about what Marshall used to do as a coach, which is he would actually have an externally defined, external to the person being coached, defined kind of, did that person get better? Did they improve? And then go back and check check with the same stakeholders and sort of see what the progress is. And his model was also super interesting in that if they didn't improve, he didn't get paid.
I always love that part of it.
I know. So everybody had real vested interest in making sure that that the person who was being coached and the person doing the coaching were well aligned on their goals. But I learned a lot from that engagement and from working with Marshall, and of course get to meet interesting people like you. So that was super, super fun.
Yeah, me too.
So what are you looking at in the next chapter? I know you've done a bunch of stuff around sort of thinking about mobility in a different way, thinking about social impact in a different way. So what are some of the fun things you're playing around with now?
Well, our biggest new venture is in electric bikes. So in 2021, we launched our first electric bikes for adults. And, the bike category has been one that I've looked at for years. First of all, I've always loved bicycles. I feel like a bicycle is about as close to a perfect product as you can get. I mean, it's good for your health. It's good for the planet. It's a delightful experience. There's just such a great thing. But when I would look at how we could potentially compete in bikes, it was really hard for me to see a path because at the time, it was basically mass market bikes and bike shop bikes, and there were no electric bikes. There were a lot of, significant incumbent brands. But as I continued to watch the category, the emergence of electric bikes combined with cargo bikes, these bikes that you can haul stuff on, got me really interested because I felt like, Radio Flyer has always been about hauling kids and cargo. That's what we've been doing for 100 years. Could we carve out a niche in bikes where we create the friendliest, most accessible, easiest to use bikes for hauling kids and cargo, just for fun on the weekend, if you want to go somewhere with your little kids on a bike, or for dropping off your kids at school, or, really using in place of a car. And so those are the bikes we launched in 2021. And we had some really good success on those with great feedback from consumers. We got great reviews on them. We're now on our generation 2 bikes. So we've learned a lot. We've improved the bikes even more. And it's been a really challenging time to be in the bike industry because bikes had this incredible boom during the pandemic. Everyone went out and bought a bike, and then everybody stopped buying bikes. And so there's been a huge glut of inventory in the bike industry. And so it's been a challenging time, but I feel like long-term, this is a really good thing for us to be in, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, and I think it plays into a trend that we're starting to see in some places. Paris would be an example where, they really are trying to reduce car dependence. And,
Yeah.
I live in a suburb and when I'm not here, and there's very little you can do that doesn't require a car.
Mm-hmm.
Just something as simple as picking up groceries, and I think we've just constructed these communities where you're so car dependent. But I do think going forward, there's a real sort of almost hunger to say, well, why do we want to be chained to these vehicles all the time? Isn't there a different way we could be structuring our communities? And I think bikes are going to be a big part of that, I would suspect.
Yeah, definitely. And when you talk to people who have kind of made some of the switch, not completely abandoning the car, but that where they're doing a lot more errands or things with their bike, they say these things it's like, I feel like a kid again. I'm riding a bike. I haven't ridden a bike in 20 years, and so fun because with the electric, having the motor on there, you get a boost.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels, if you've never ridden an electric bike, and most Americans still have never ridden an electric bike, I always say it's like having bionic legs is how it feels. Because when you're pedaling, you get that boost, and it's awesome because you're still riding a bike, but the hills get flatter. The wind is at your back all the time. So it's really, really fun.
So it's healthy, but it's also not too daunting.
Yes, exactly.
I love that you could encourage people just by making it really easier. So we're on this podcast, chatting to people who are interested in management and leadership. And do you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to share with this audience?
Yeah, in terms of leadership, I think self-awareness, really becoming self-aware. And the only way to become self-aware is through the feedback of others. And being the leader, it's really hard to get feedback because nobody wants to tell you about what you're doing wrong.
Spinach in your teeth.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I, like Marshall always says, ask for it in the form of feed forward. What can I do in the future? People will be more likely to give you feedback. Yeah. And I'd say that'd be the number one job, I think, of a leader at first, is to truly become self-aware.
I love that. There's also some fascinating research about power, and that one of the things that power actually does is it distorts your brain so that it becomes much more difficult to take in feedback. You just don't even hear it. So if you remember that after the one of the oil fields exploded, the British Petroleum CEO was just couldn't process what was going on. It was like he had some sort of deficit. And one of my psychologist friends said, "Oh yeah, that was power at work. He's been so powerful for so long. It just was like his brain could not take it in." So I think some of what you're talking about in terms of feedback, self-awareness, making sure you don't get so intoxicated by that feeling of power that you just create these blind spots for yourself. I think it's so important.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Isn't it? I know, really.
Yeah.
Interesting. And that's one of the reasons why, there's another fascinating study. How old are your kids?
My wife and I have 4 kids aged 29 to 16.
Okay, so you will know what I'm talking about. There was a famous study that was done of CEO narcissism. So looking at, there's this sort of externally validated traits which betray a level of narcissism. And these researchers looked at all the different things in the CEO's environment and what tended to make them more narcissistic or less. And the biggest single factor that made them less narcissistic was if they had teenage kids at home.
That's good.
Isn't that good? You want honest feedback?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
you're never going to feel too big for your britches if you've got teenagers.
Well, yeah, and it's like if you have a spouse, usually your spouse will tell you what you need to know. Like they're going to give you that feedback. But boy, it's hard to hear that, you know. But with practice, you can. That's the thing. Like it's a skill, like anything else. You can start to hear it. If you really feel like my spouse is here to help me, like thank you. Thank you for telling me that I do this annoying thing.
Well, it can be, I mean, if it comes from a place of love and we all
Yeah.
succeed together, then it's a completely different thing than if it's something that would like cut you down or whatever.
Yes.
This hour has flown by, my goodness. So how do people learn more? Clearly they can get this book, the history book.
Yeah. Yeah, LinkedIn would be the best place. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Well, this has been just a tour de force in the management and joy and creating a bright future for a beloved company. So thank you so much, Robert.
Rita, thank you, and thank you for all the amazing work you do. I've learned so much from you.
Well, thank you.